Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jose Ochoa. I lead education programs at TWiML. We're excited to have you here for TWiML Fest. This session is NLP for entrepreneurs. Your host today is Leonardo Apollonio, Applied Research Engineer at Clarabridge. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors for their support of TWiML Fest and today's session. Since today's session is hosted on Zoom, please take a minute to note the location of the chat. Please feel free to send any questions throughout the session via the chat. We'll be monitoring there. If you're watching on YouTube, we can see your questions in the YouTube chat as well. One more thing to note, there is a Google template to follow along with this discussion. The link to that template was sent in an email prior to the start of this session, but if you have not had a chance to see that, no need to worry, we'll be dropping it in the chat shortly. We will also be creating a Slack discussion channel for this session so that conversation can continue beyond this session. For the purpose of the session, we'll have chat in the Zoom chat, but afterwards, feel free to continue the conversation on Slack as well. And we'll be inviting everyone who registered for this session to the Slack channel shortly too. All right, so with that, I'd like to turn it over to your host, Leo.
Hi, thanks, Jose. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I'm just happy to be here and maybe share something that we all can learn and are interested in, specific around like entrepreneurship. NLP is going through a lot of advancements right now and enabling a lot of new use cases. So, you know, if you're interested in, let me share my screen. If you're interested in how to think about deriving use cases, you know, at a new company or at an existing company, you know, I think that this is a place for you. Specifically, we'll be going over thinking about how to stand up like an entrepreneurial organization, you know, centering around NLP, thinking about like a business plan. Jose mentioned a Google Sheet, and how can we sort of like continue this conversation? How can we support each other? How can we meet others who are interested in this material? Some questions. One of the first things you have to think about when you're thinking about a organization or company, like what value are you delivering to the customer? You know, in this context, like what NLP problem are you solving? How will you generate money? What kind of customers are you going to have, and how are you going to reach them? How are you going to build a relationship with them? Every company needs key resources. You know, another way to think about that is how do you differentiate yourself from other companies or offerings? And do you need to reach to external partners? Do you need to reach to funding or consulting? So I think we're going to start off with, this is going to be a very discussion-based conversation. So, you know, the first question is like, for the people who are in the room, you know, what NLP problem are you currently working on, or do you want to work on? Or what business problem or value proposition are you trying to like meet? And here I have some examples. You know, a lot of a new big thing now is conversational assistants, you know, where people are interacting with a chatbot, and they can serve very basic, relatively basic use cases. One way to think about it is they are really good at filling out forms, right? They're able to identify like what information is missing or what information they need in order to, let's say, like order a pizza is a very classic. There are some other use cases that are a lot harder, like I've heard of like psychological or psychiatrist use cases, but that gets very tough to measure. And then there's typical NLP problems around like classification, where, you know, given a document or a description, you want to classify to a category, and then, or maybe you have a whole data set and you want to understand what topics does this data set cover. So like topic modeling, like let's say you didn't know what top categories were possible for all of your documents in your database. What topics can you extract? And that's one way to think about maybe bootstrapping, starting on a NLP problem. Did anyone want to share the NLP problem that they're working on or planning to work on or interested in learning more about? I think I don't know if you can unmute yourself. You can definitely raise your hand. Volunteers?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So quick NLP problem would be for legal documents, be able to read through a vast quantity of legal documents to look for specific language such as a legal clause or a type of agreement, identify where that is in the document and replace that with modified language that is more correct. And this is a use case that is actually been developed. Just wanted to get your perspective on it.
I think, so I've also heard of similar use cases. So the really nice thing about legal documents are they are consistent because they're legal documents. So that's one of the really nice things about the data set is it will be consistent. One of the really hard things about legal documents will be the structure. So depending on the complexity of the clause that you want to replace, the hard part about really long range documents is the dependencies, the implications of a change in a legal document. So let's say you change, section 1.3, how do you know that all of the future references in the document are consistent with that change is one of the issues. However, if it's a very self-contained piece of information, like let's say a date or a definition, or if you change the original definition, that's very possible today. It falls under the realm of information extraction. If you don't have the documents in a digital format, you'll have to use OCR. But I've definitely heard of, yes, processing legal documents, finding a specific clause where you want to change a piece of information and then re-render or post-process there. So that's definitely possible. Yeah, it's very interesting and exciting. And then, and that's also a very safe use case because not very safe, but it's a very structured problem. It's very easy to measure whether you have correctly made the change or not. And of course, you'll need domain experts like lawyers so that you'll understand the implications of those changes and how to make them.
Absolutely. Will we have a chance to discuss how to do it? There are different ways to do it, whether you use something as rudimentary as regular expressions or spacey or neural networks, custom neural networks.
We can touch upon, yes. So you went over very high level, the different ways that you can go over that problem. What was I going to say? There will be some time for questions later. We're focusing a lot more, we can touch about that later. Not yet. So I think it'll be like slide 5 or 6. One thing I was going to say is, with respect to models, it's very hard to extend. If you think about building a model, you have to ask a lot of questions about what is exactly that model doing. If it's like a date identifier, that's very easy to build, identify, to build a training set for. But if you want to build a model that says, this not in a more abstract concept, like if you want to find like a responsibility model, like it'll tell you who is responsible for what. That's a much harder concept. because it's very hard to define how responsibility is expressed and how do you measure if responsibility was expressed. So I think we'll just roll with or move forward with the legal use case. That's a very interesting one. So typically for the business model, depending on the underlying infrastructure will dictate, or like technology will dictate what kind of business model you have. So services is thought of as one-off. So if you are building a custom solution for every customer, that if you're building a custom solution for every customer because it's a very complex problem or the technology doesn't support a general solution, that lends itself more towards a services business model. And that's mainly because the man hours, the people time is not like amortized over the entire customer base. It's effectively directly trading time for money in those cases. There are more general, less human-centered or human resource-centered, business models around data insights. So a very common example is if you provide an API that provides a data point like recognizing named entities or sentiment. This is very widespread and common. Enrichment use case, Google provides NLP, NLU API, Amazon, Microsoft, all of the big cloud vendors, and a lot of the big cloud vendors offer an API given a document or a paragraph of text. How do you enrich that document with metadata? And then of course there are much smaller players, and the trade-off is the smaller players are probably serving a specific use case that that the big players don't need. So let's say if it was a legal use case, I don't really think that you care, like that sentiment is useful in a legal use. I could be wrong, but there are specific metadata that is specific for a legal use case that like a generic cloud vendor wouldn't offer. And then the most general or another business model that is SaaS, so software as a service. So if you add a bot to, let's say, fill out orders for like ordering pizzas or taking down customer information, then that's like typical software model where you have a bot that you make once and then you deploy for your specific use case that you can reuse over and over again. And then if you think about, so those are the business models, but then business models operate within a specific like business context. So, or business lines. So which parts of a company use technology? And the answer is all of them. And a small enumeration would be marketing. So this is very good for, bots. They can take in customer information. Risk management, that's very close to legal, where they will identify maybe dependencies or what parties or entities are in a document, and just, it might not be able to fully manage the specific like risk management score, but it's very easy to tell what parties are involved in which documents. Finance, NLP use case, if let's say you have receipts, that's a very common, where you're actually receipts or invoices are structured documents that you can parse and then automatically enter into a database. Customer employee engagement is, the use case that comes to mind is again like chatbots, or you can also have like sentiment extraction, right? If you want to maybe measure employee or customer engagement, and of course there's many others across all the business lines. So when thinking about the business lines and what purpose or what value your product is serving or delivering, there's actually, yes, you have a number of business lines, but for each business line, you actually have specific users of your product. So the use cases of team members are different than executives. And this also gets into a lot of the difficulties in the enterprise space where you're actually selling to a different set. The buyers, the people who hold the money are not the people who are using. And then it's a hurdle or part of the sales cycle to communicate and get buy-in from both the users and executive leadership, that meet the value and price that you are saying that you'll deliver. So if there's communicating to executive leadership in ROI use case, and also making the product usable to the sales representatives on the individual teams, is sort of the typical hurdles that you have in an enterprise sales cycle. And then for each, you have individual team members, and individual team members are managed by team leaders. And then you have team leaders who are managed by business unit leadership, and then executive leadership. So for instance, team members would be a salesperson. A team leader would just manage sales leaders. A business unit would be maybe like North America sales teams. And then executive would be like the CFO, so financial officer, which is like the very top person who is across all sales teams, across all geographies. And similar patterns usually exist across other business lines. Business units can either be geographical or actual business units. So like if a product spans multiple geographies, then there are different choices. There's different organizations will split up their hierarchy or organization differently. But yeah, you'll have marketing, finance, HR, people development. Data analysis is sort of like our bucket for thinking about the technical people or analysts. Anyone technical who is going to be using data, and then actual legal. So that's risk management or contracts, etc. Any questions or comments? All right. So once you've mapped out the value that you want to deliver, and you've mapped out, let's go back to the beginning. Once you've mapped out what exact problem you're delivering, so information extraction on legal documents, you have to think about how are you going to make money. So are you going to sell this on a per engagement, like per company? It requires man hours to generate the IP or build the solution, or is it a general platform that you have that can generate the solution for any customer? And then once you have this solution and your business model, you can think about who is actually going to use this. So actual lawyers will be the team members or what's the other one? Paralegals. Are they going to be the ones who are going to be using your contract management solution? However, depending on your price point, you might need executive leadership buy-in in order to actually sign the contract. If it's a 3-year multi-million-dollar contract, you'll actually need executive leadership in order to approve that sale, and support and negotiations. A lot more people get involved than just the people who are using the solution. And then we get to the actual part around what approaches or what do you need? So now that we know that we have a business value, we have people who want it, how are we actually going to build that solution? So we broke that down into two very big buckets: technical constraints, and then people constraint, and then people needs. So when you're thinking about information extraction from legal documents, you have to first consider, when I think about information extraction on legal documents, I think of that very close to entity extraction. However, if you want to get more generic or more broad, who talked before? Who spoke that mentioned the legal document use case? Did they
MASH.
repeat that again?
MASH.
Oh, MASH. Did I say that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep, you did.
So now we can get into like technical details, or talk briefly about technical details. You brought up, I think the number one thing when approaching any sort of like ML, AI problem, you have to be very specific about the problem statement. So you mentioned identifying like a specific clause in a legal document, right? And if you have to consider how generic do you want the solution, right? Is this a proof of concept, or is this an actual or do you want to build this out to support like multiple customers, or how much have you thought about this use case?
So for this use case, there are a few things that you would want to look for. You want it to be fairly exact. You want to look for termination clause in contracts. What is the specific termination clause, and confirm the contracting parties. So you effectively would want an NLP model that would scan through all your corpus of legal contracts to extract out the termination clause. Where is it? Which paragraph, or what is the termination clause itself, from all of the language in a given document, and maybe even parse out the contracting parties in that contract. Party one, contracting party, second contracting party, and so on. Just to give you a simple example, on a financial contract, or maybe similar contracts, you may also want to extract out, say, the interest rate if it's a financial contract.
Yeah, I think, these are really great use cases. I think that when you think about the definition, I would be curious about like existing baselines, like how is it done today? It's probably done manually by lawyers.
Mm-hmm. It is.
It takes probably multiple hours, and so we're looking to build a solution that would automate extracting these very well scoped problems or tasks, and not fully automate, maybe augment. I guess one of the questions I would want to know is how important is full automation versus augmenting? Like, is it good enough to just identify a section, or is it a section like section 1.3, or does it need to be like the exact sentence to be useful or valuable? Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. So to be useful and valuable, you would want the exact sentence. What is that exact clause? And then there would be additional steps that you would want to automate that would replace a poorly worded termination clause and recommend a better worded termination clause that it can replace.
Is a clause one sentence or multiple sentences or parts of the sentence?
It can be multiple sentences.
Okay. So
but it is harder. Multiple sentences are harder than a single sentence.
Much harder for a number of reasons. And
exactly.
I think, and then when you talk about like replacing or automating the identified clause, is it replaced with, again, a single sentence or multiple sentence? Or there's a lot of like legal questions around, is that good enough? If it's is a single sentence what is used to express a termination clause? Is that typically how that happens?
Those are all valid questions that would need to be defined by the stakeholders very precisely. You would literally like write those into a statement of work, because just as you said, the more complicated it is, the lower the degree of accuracy when it comes to a machine learning model.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I think and each of those different parameters will actually help you scope the kind of solution you need. So if they've only had one termination clause that's only been expressed one way, and you only need to remove one sentence, it's in that case, you might be able to get away with a regular expression because there's only one version. They've only done the termination clause one way for all of time. Then it's a very well scoped, easy to parse, extract, and change. However, if you get to use cases where there's evolutions, there's multiple versions of the termination clause, or the termination clause has gotten more complex, then the exact scope becomes a lot harder. I think I would be, depending on the level of scoping, I would be wary of fully automating. I'd be wary of fully automating the solution end to end. Especially other things to consider is how much training data do you have. So one of the hidden costs of a lot of ML or AI projects are the need for tagged data or training data. And the difference in a lot of enterprise use cases, or the difference between like Google and enterprise, or in my head, is this concept of like reinforcement loops or self-feeding loops. So an example would be Google's use case is search. And Google's actually a hot topic because Google has a really good search engine because everyone uses Google search, and the more people use Google search, the better Google search gets, right? That's that self-reinforcing loop. It's actually rare for an enterprise use case to have that feedback loop, that network effect, in order to build an extra product or build a machine learning product or solution. What's more likely is that you have a task like extracting a termination clause, and no one has done it before, or maybe the data exists, or the data doesn't exist. So an example would be all of your documents are managed in Microsoft Word, but the saved document, you didn't click track changes, so you actually don't know, the previous change versus the target change, or so you're actually going to rely on people or a team in order to build a training corpus. So that's one of the hidden costs.
So subject matter experts.
Yeah, subject matter experts. And then another typical use case or aspect is like, does the answer need to be interpretable or explainable? So how do you know if a predicted explainable clause is an explainable clause? Like, do you need to justify that identified sentence or section? And depending on your use case, the answer might be self-evident because the answers are reviewed by subject matter experts. However, if you get to other use cases around like maybe topic modeling or sentiment extraction, it might not necessarily be it's the nice thing about interpretable or explainable is it helps to validate or speed up the validation process when determining acceptable answers or a quality of solution. Otherwise, it's fairly black box, and you don't really have, and you won't have a way to granularly evaluate. You'll only have a binary yes, no, and the world tends to be more complicated than a binary yes, no. Yeah, so yeah, I think machine learning project scoping is definitely will make or break a lot of your machine learning projects. I think when it comes to developing a solution, it's a much safer bet to start simple and that delivers value. So the progression that you mentioned, right? Start with regular expressions, and then when you can identify that there are use cases that don't satisfy that, where regular expressions aren't good enough, then you upgrade to Spacey, and then when Spacey isn't good enough, then you upgrade to neural networks. I think if you jump straight to neural networks, there are a lot of hidden decisions, even when using a specific model, that you're not going to be able, that you'll overlook. And over design, one of the main concerns is the metric used to evaluate the solution won't be appropriate for the solution that you're building. So let's say your solution identifies the section, but not the exact clause, right? If you have a classic accuracy metric that's based on identification, it's going, you might be not giving yourself enough credit. So, so it's really important to, when you're defining a problem, also measure success, and if possible, define different levels of success so that you can more easily say good enough versus 80-20 rule. It's very easy to get like the first part or the first 80%. It's the last 20% that's really gonna eat up a lot of your time. And then once you've scoped a solution and granularity of needs, then you can go over what people do you need to build the solution. So in any organization, you have to have, the people on the team need to have the skills and capabilities. So if this is an off-premise solution, you're probably going to need a UI. You're going to need systems engineers or DevOps, AWS, users, a lot more than just ML, NLP practitioners or skill sets, right? Spacey in Python is only one small part of the entire pipeline needed to deliver value to an end customer. If the people you have don't have the skills, then you need to consider development and training. And if you're bringing in new people, then the appropriate incentives. That's important for any organization, especially for new companies or startups. You can get into whole big conversations around equity and options, and so that's that.
I think you've described it perfectly. I could not have described the reality on the ground any better. All of those considerations are important and have to be at play.
Yeah, there's a famous picture. I think it's Google came out with like the hidden cost of machine learning. It's a hidden cost of some, and it's like ML code is like one small box. There's a lot of other much bigger boxes that are at play here when you're building these kinds of solutions. And then so once you have defined your internal resources, the team internally that's going to help you define, build, deliver, is that enough? Do you need external resources, advisors, investors, consultants, partners, vendors, training. There's lots of, NLP training courses like Andrew Ong's. There's like he has like a deep learning school, partners and vendors. So do you have people, if you have, let's say, a data endpoint in API, are you going to have partners that are going to sell it for you? Are you going to stand up your own sales organization? Are you going to bring in third-party vendors that'll supply you maybe metadata or annotated data sets, right? Or annotation vendors. Those are all very popular. Consultants, it's valid. It's valid to have a consultant come in and give you advice on specific aspects of your solution. If they're going to be consulting on your IP, you're probably going to have to fight. I think IP considerations is definitely something is a definitely important part to consider if you're bringing consultants who are actually working on your core differentiable piece of right, which is considered IP. However, there are some conversations around, with a lot of the reason for the NLP advancement is because of the openness. So it's if you are working on core research, it's going to be hard to defend, given that you're against the whole community, and how differentiated is that solution, and then you might not be able to necessarily rely on data moats, because language is a long tail distribution. So given there's lots of different ways to say the same thing, and the things that you can say, there's a lot of different things that you can say, right? So like there's a lot of different, there's a lot of let's say expressing sadness. There's a lot of ways to express sadness, right? But then if you want to express sadness, happiness, pleasant, angry, sad, all of those enumerations, it then becomes like a double long tail. Language is complex. Investors, if you need outside money, and then advisors, if you are looking to make connections, initial connections, when standing up a new organization. Questions, concerns, discussion, feedback? So, okay, so it's not actually NLP projects. It's TWiML Fest. It's actually, TWiML Fest NLP Entrepreneurship is the actual format text, is the actual Slack group or Slack channel. So TWiML community is the community for all people who TWiML community is a Slack workspace for everyone who is interested in being in touch and making connections and working on the same thing, working on projects. There's classes, and one of the Slack channels in the TWiML community is this TWiML Fest Entrepreneurship, so that we can continue the conversation around what problems are you trying to solve, how you're trying to solve it, and that might lead to some of the other communities around Kaggle NLP or NLP projects. There's a lot of people who meet weekly in order to talk about how are they solving NLP projects and what NLP projects they're interested in. So lots of NLP resources. Thank you for listening. If there's any other questions, now it's time to ask them.
So I have a quick question, actually.
Sure.
At the start, we shared the template, the workshop template with everyone. Wonder if maybe you could share with the audience what your thoughts are there and how that can help people get started thinking about entrepreneurship and NLP and what you'd like to see as next steps with that.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm definitely here as a resource. It's NLP, entrepreneurship, they're definitely topics that I'm very passionate about. So if you want to take a stab at filling out the, I think you can make a copy for yourself or download.
Yep, you can click on make a copy there as well, and that'll copy it into each individual's Google Drive.
Oh yeah, you're totally right. So yeah, feel free to make a copy or download locally, fill out. And this is effectively a worksheet to help you organize your thoughts around how do you get started with, with standing up or taking on a new NLP project, right? So an NLP project can happen at a startup, or it can even happen at large organizations. Right? So this is a way to help you get started around defining what problem are you trying to solve and what resources you'll need to solve them. And if you have questions or want to share your worksheets or discuss the worksheets, join the Slack channel. We can start the conversation there, and we can review and talk about, discuss ideas, and give feedback on each of these questions. So these questions should look very similar, right? Define your value proposition. What business problem are you trying to solve? Define your business model. How will you make money? Who is actually going to use your product, and how will you reach them? And your key resources, your key internal resources. So the team and solution that you'll need in order to deliver your solution to the customer segments you've identified in the business model that you have specified. And do you need outside help in order to deliver on that? And yeah, I can actually, and everyone received the link to this document. And if you don't have it, I can, yeah. And if you don't have it, I can add a copy to the TWiML Fest, to the TWiML community link. So this is going to be actually the worksheet. Edit. This is the worksheet. And I'm in the Slack channel. That's me. So feel free to join, ask questions, and we can definitely continue the conversation there.
All right, Leo. Well, thank you so much for hosting this session. Do we have any final questions for Leo before we move the conversation to Slack? Anyone else have anything to ask or anything you want to discuss regarding entrepreneurship and NLP? All right, everyone. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thanks for your time. Leo, thanks so much for the great session. We encourage everyone to continue the conversation with Leo in Slack. I think this is just the beginning of discussion around NLP and entrepreneurship, and excited to see Leo take the lead on that. So thanks everyone for attending this TWiML Fest session. Hope you get to join the rest of our sessions at twimlfest.com. The video for this session will be available on the session page as well as on our YouTube channel. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.